For survivors or victims of domestic violence, the holidays can be a very scary and difficult time
Hmm.
because they so want their families to have a good holiday.
I have always loved the holidays. And with Thanksgiving coming up this week, the holiday season is officially in full swing. For most, the holiday season means lovely gatherings with family members and participating in beloved traditions. It's a time synonymous with joy, magic, and cheerfulness. But that isn't every person's experience during the holiday season. For many people living with abuse, it can be a particularly dark and isolating time. They may not be able to see their family, afford presents for their children, or participate in any traditions. So, does abuse get worse around the holidays? And if so, why? This is Unsilenced, a JBWS podcast where we have real conversations about abuse. I'm MC Robinson, and today we're speaking with.
Robin Hughes, and I am the Crisis Response Team Manager for JBWS.
In this episode, Robin is going to explore the dynamics of domestic violence and how the holiday season could add additional pressure to families impacted by abuse. So, when we're speaking about the holidays, it's a pretty broad term. So, just to define it a little bit more, I think we're talking about the period between early November and New Year's Day. So, all the holidays that fall between that time. So, in your experience as the manager of the crisis response team at JBWS, do you think we get more call outs around the holidays? What have you seen?
I see a decrease in actual call outs.
Interesting.
And there's a big reason for that. First of all, domestic violence doesn't take a holiday, right? It happens all the time. And for survivors or victims of domestic violence, the holidays can be a very scary and difficult time
Hmm.
because they so want their families to have a good holiday. So they're less likely to call because then they would feel it's their fault that the family's not together, or it's their fault that they initiated the police to come to the home and then
Mm.
separate the parties. Like there's a sense of pressure around the holidays for people who are living with abuse to keep it together.
Mhm.
Um, and just be a family because you're trying to make those memories, we're trying to make that hallmark moment.
Mhm.
And we don't want to be the cause for that not to happen, I think. So,
That's so interesting because I feel there's a general belief that abuse does, quote, get worse around the holidays. But so you're saying that you haven't really seen that reflected in calling out, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's not an escalation.
oh, there's an escalation
Mm.
because if you just look at the consumption of alcohol and
Hmm.
drugs around the holidays, the financial pressures around the holidays
Hmm.
to spend more money for your families,
Hmm.
unrealistic expectations of what the holidays are supposed to look like, right?
Hmm.
And how it's supposed to feel. So I think people will tolerate more because of
Hmm.
those things. And we see an increase after the holidays reporting what happened during the holidays. So
Mm.
January, I see more calls because I think now the holidays are over and then they can actually feel more relaxed to make that phone call or more in a place where, okay, my kids got their holiday presents, they're okay now, and now I can report.
Could you talk a little bit more about those contributing factors? I think you mentioned alcohol, people are home more, and I think there's this myth that alcohol causes domestic violence. And you know that that's not true necessarily, but how does it affect domestic violence?
Well, I talk a lot about alcohol and drug use around domestic violence, and we know that domestic violence is power and control. It has nothing to do
Yes.
with drugs and
Mm-hmm.
alcohol, but it pokes the bear. It is the key to the gate. So if
Mm-hmm.
someone has a tendency to be abusive, that is in them anyway. That is inside of them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and alcohol and drugs allows it to escape more easily.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can always fall back on that excuse, like, oh, I was drinking, or oh, I was
Mm-hmm.
high, or, that would be a reason for them to justify their behavior. But in reality, it had nothing to do with the behavior. It just let the behavior come out
Mm.
more readily with an excuse attached to it.
Yeah, and I also think just in doing some research about this, certain people also said that people being home and off of work allowed them to then further engage in substance abuse and alcohol,
Yeah.
because they just honestly have more time. And so when people who are using abuse are home more often, does that also contribute to more instances of abuse?
Absolutely. They're together more, right? But a lot of people have time off from their work during the
Yeah.
holidays, with those long breaks. And that also isolates someone who's enduring abuse to be
Mm-hmm.
at home a lot more too, because they're off, so they're together more. And there's just so much. I mean, anyone in the world experiences stress during the
Mm-hmm.
holidays. It's just a part of the holidays, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you're with an abusive partner, that has to be escalating.
Yeah.
But again, it comes down to the reporting of it, right? Is anybody going to really report
Mm.
during the holidays? Because it would ruin it, right? I don't want to ruin it,
Wow.
right? And then, of course, we know victims self-blame. So then it would be
Mm.
my fault that the holidays were ruined, right?
And that could probably even be a tactic that an abusive partner might be using in saying, like,
Sure.
do you really want to ruin X, Y, and Z holiday for the kids by acting the way that you're acting? Do you see that too? That kind of use that joy and magic of the holiday season to control them, like place that kind of onus on them?
Yes, 100%. And I also think that there's a pressure to someone who uses abuse to be nice because there's other
Mm.
people around during the holidays, right? So if you're
Yeah.
having your family over or you're having friends over, that person is fighting to be on their best behavior.
Mm.
So when they leave, it will escalate for the person who they're abusing because they've had to control it and hold it together
Mm-hmm.
while people were watching. So it does make more of a risk factor when the party is over and
Mm.
that person is left there with that person because we know that it is not an anger management issue.
Mm-hmm.
We know that they are people who use abuse are able to hold their anger in the world. They're not
Yeah.
abusing the woman making their coffee or the man at the bank because he took too long. They're abusing the people in their homes. So when that party's over and they're dispersing, that person has to remain in that home with that person who is now going to be even more angry because they had to play nice.
Yeah. Why does that make them so angry to have to put on that face? And then there's something about like that holiday table and people being around and just the special interest that's paid on the holidays that sometimes builds up those abusive behaviors. And I'm curious, like, what do you think that reason is that they will like maybe explode or escalate after everybody is gone? Is it just like, I don't have to try anymore? Like, what is it?
Well, we know families are stressors anyway, right? Like, Aunt Sally has her opinion about something that you may not, and they're going to bite their tongue because they can't be angry with the person. So
Mm.
your brother said this, so now they won't say it to the brother. But then when everybody's left, then it becomes the person's fault. And, you didn't say what you should have said. You didn't back me up with that. You didn't, you have to place that anger somewhere and they're not going to, it's displaced on the person who is most vulnerable in that relationship. So it's going to come out there when everybody goes away.
Oh my gosh, yeah, because then they're at fault for how everybody else acted towards them, I think, which is a really, really interesting component of this. But you mentioned in general, I think how families can be stressful around the holidays. I mean, particularly if you consider if you have children and you're trying to provide one presence for them as well, I think that financial strain also could escalate these behaviors. Now, is that true? Like, how does like worrying about finances or something kind of add to what we talked about in addition to like alcohol and substances and trying to put on a good face? Is it just like the perfect storm?
It is the perfect storm. It really is. And if you have someone in a relationship who is in the power seat and you can't make decisions, so say you're going to scrape and you're going to pull from over here because you want your children to have this item, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there's no discussion around that. And then that person's angry because you made a unilateral decision to spend money where
Mm-hmm.
that other person didn't feel it should have been spent. And then you have a lot of blended families, right? So you have someone who's these aren't their children. So therefore, their priority is not those children or that holiday. We see a lot of that. It is a perfect storm between the alcohol use, the families being together, the isolation of being together all the time, more than usual, the stressors of finances, and just add that to our regular stresses of finances with the
Mm-hmm.
economy the way it is. This is just an added time. And then you're bringing in all those different personalities into one room around that table. And somehow someone is going to take the brunt of that.
Mm-hmm.
Someone is going to have to pay the price for that table environment when they're not communicative in that forum. By the time I see them in police stations or emergency rooms, the violence during the holidays has escalated to the point of police involvement, maybe involuntarily. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe a family member called because they heard something or saw something, or a neighbor in an apartment heard fighting and yelling. And then by the time we're there or the police are responding, I think those scenes are worse than they normally would be. It's escalated beyond a verbal altercation into physical violence. I see that by the time the police are there during the holidays, it's worse. It's just a
Mm.
worse environment.
And why do you think it's so important for us to make that distinction that these things like the substances or alcohol or financial stressors, that they aren't the cause for the abuse? We talked about it a little bit, but why is it so important to make that clear? Is it so victims don't blame themselves for it or think that if these were gone, that everything would be fine? Or why is it so important to make that distinction that these don't cause abuse?
Because I think victims look for reasons.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, they blame themselves. Like, if I did this different, if I had said something different, if I had, like, they think they can control that person. And in reality, they really can't, because what is triggering that person one day will probably not be the same trigger that they have the next day. So it's like trying to navigate in the dark. You don't know what you're going to stumble into that day.
Mm-hmm.
Alcohol is an agitator. It's just a way to let go of that anger in a way with a justification.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yes, I think victims do believe many times, like, oh, it was the alcohol, it wasn't the person,
Mm-hmm.
because they want to latch on to the possibility that that person is not that person, like that who's abusing them. They want to have that hope that that person, it's not them, that it's not in them, that there was a cause of it, right? It was my fault if I did something different. It's the alcohol, that's what's making it happen. Because that reality that maybe that person is not the kindest person or the person that they want them to be is very painful and scary, to think that you're in love with someone who can be that, angry and that violent or that manipulative or that controlling. That reality is a bitter pill and a hard pill to swallow.
And I can imagine people wanting to be able to say, oh no, it's the alcohol, almost as an excuse so that they can not have to deal with the reality that that person could be harming them and could be capable of those things. And I think that's just so important to really focus on, because I don't think that's talked about enough, honestly. So do you think that the attention being off of them also sometimes can prompt some of this? So, for instance, at the holidays, like you said, certain people are trying to make it really special for the kids. They're trying to please their parents. They're trying to kind of maybe engage in the community if they're able in certain ways. Do you think that contributes at all to the abuse also being like an agitator, that there's like less attention on them?
Absolutely. Yes, because we do know that people who use abuse need to be the center of attention all the time.
Mhm.
And it's almost as if you're prioritizing them lower on the list, and
Mhm.
they don't like it. They are not comfortable with it because they should always be at the top of the list. Um, that is very, very true. That I think that and then there's that pressure on the person who's receiving the abuse, that they have to manage and keep all these balls in the air so that nobody falls through the cracks and everybody feels equally important. Um, and someone who uses abuse doesn't see it as level. Like,
Mhm.
they have to be above. They can't be level, right?
Yeah.
Ideally, you'd want level. I want to treat everybody, like give everybody what they need, but that one person needs more than they can possibly ever give.
Hmm.
So there's a false sense that, I can give enough, but the person could never give enough. They could never give enough. So the holidays is a great excuse and like you said, just a perfect storm to not be enough.
Mm. Wow. Why is it that they kind of always feel like they need to have more and that you can almost never satisfy them? Because I think this is a pretty common theme of, oh, if I just, intervened in this situation, or if I just made their dinner the way that they actually wanted, like, why does that happen?
People get indoctrinated into a thought process, right? And it's really not about what the conversation is.
Hmm.
It's really about making sure the person feels like they can never do it right.
Yeah.
What better way to control someone, right? So
Yeah.
even if you made the perfect meal, it's not going to be the perfect meal because they can't let you know it was the perfect meal because then you succeeded. And in the relationship, you're not allowed to succeed. You have
Mhm.
to always be not up to par because then what could people complain about, right?
Wow.
If your meal was perfect and the house is clean enough and the kids are polite enough, then there's nothing to fight over. So
Mhm.
there's always going to be something. Is
Mhm.
that's the whole idea of that psychological warfare to make someone feel less than, that
Mhm.
you're never able to not walk on eggshells because you never know what's expected of you. And it changes all the time. The
Mhm.
expectations change all the time.
Yeah.
And it's
Um,
hard to navigate. I mean, it's so hard to navigate that environment for somebody who is being oppressed.
yeah.
It's a tough spot to be in. It's a tough spot
Yes.
to try to navigate all those things at the same time and keep everybody happy because we know people who are vulnerable to being controlled are the people pleasers.
Yeah.
They are so set on making everybody happy
Yeah.
that they're all consumed in it, you
But
know?
why do you think a person that's using abuse will never be happy? Like, is it truly just that they kind of have resigned that they can't be perfect because then they'd lose the power? Or like, what exactly is
For
that
some,
reason?
for some, but some, I mean, we know just by studies that someone who uses abuse of power control in a relationship is dealing with their own trauma and their
Mm-hmm.
own feeling less than. So what better way to feel more than to make everybody around you feel less than, right?
Wow.
That's the perfect way to heal you, like not really heal yourself, but to feel better than you normally feel. Like, what is that trauma? What happened to that person that they feel that everyone around them needs to be beneath them for them to be risen up?
Wow. Yeah. And I would imagine then on holidays in general, not having that attention, feeling less than, it might even be triggering to some people that are using abuse. And I'm kind of curious, do you think that this phenomenon of abuse may be increasing right after the holidays to report what happened during the holidays? Does that just happen in like the fall, winter holidays? Or do you see that in like the spring or like St. Patrick's Day or things like that? Is it just,
Birthday parties, Fourth of
oh,
July, Super
hmm,
Bowl, like there
hmm,
is, like I said, domestic violence does not take a holiday. You
hmm.
know, anything, it will happen no matter what.
Since the holidays are coming up, what would you want someone that's experiencing abuse to know? Like, if you could say something to them, what would you hope that they could know this season or keep in mind?
Number one, no matter what's going on, it's not their fault.
Yeah.
It is not their fault. They cannot control everything as much as they try.
Mhm.
Um, that there's help out there, that they don't have to be alone, that they can make a phone call. When they go to the supermarket, if that's the only time they're alone without their partner, call the helpline and say, I'm really struggling. And safety plan around it, safety plan around your family gatherings.
Mm.
So you have a plan in place if something escalates, how to de-escalate it, what's going to be the next steps for you to be safe. Also, for people who are going to people's homes for the holidays, there's things they can do if they know that that relationship
Mm.
may be rocky. And one is to listen without judgment, right?
Mm.
If you are going to someone's home and they share something, just listen without judgment. Don't tell them what to do. They're already being told what to do. So that's where the listening and just being there and holding space matters. Remind them that they're not alone, right? They're not alone in the experience. They're not alone in what's happening. Notice it. Saying nothing is not good either,
Mm.
because then you're just turning a blind eye, and then they think they're crazy for experiencing it, and no one's going to believe me because no one even said anything when they noticed it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So not in front of somebody, pull them to the side, go to the kitchen and, oh, it looks like you need more green beans. I'll help you with that. Are you okay? Like, I saw that this was happening, and highlight what you see, right?
Mm-hmm.
I saw this person being disrespectful to you. I saw them being very angry and short. Is there anything I can do to help you? What, do you need services? Like, I know of an agency, right? Knowledge is key.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing where to send them, knowing that number to call. It doesn't happen in a silo, but we like to believe it does.
There's also a lot of rhetoric out there of like, oh, everybody, when you gather with your family, there's going to be fights, like things are going to happen. Like it's just a common thing you see online. So I'm curious, what are some signs that something could be like a frustration boiling over or indicative of an abusive relationship? Because some people might be like, oh, no, I'm not going to step in. That's their marriage. That's their relationship. What would you say to somebody to identify those red flags of this is actually abuse and we should be talking about it?
If the hair on the back of their neck is standing up, that is their internal compass saying this feels wrong.
Hmm.
And you being able to just say it maybe you're wrong.
Right.
Maybe you're wrong, but not saying something is wrong. Because maybe you're too sensitive. Maybe you had a bad experience. Maybe you're bringing in your own life's trauma into
Hmm.
that room, and that's how you're feeling about it. But it doesn't hurt to engage in the communication and let that person say no. Let that person say, no, I'm okay. Because then you've opened the door for that. If they're lying or they're not ready to speak their truth, that they know they can come to you when they are, that they see that you heard, they know that you're an ally in it, and they will come back to you. This is what the CRT program is all about. If every time I went to a police station or hospital, that person says, yep, I'm ready to go. I want out of this relationship. I'm ready to move on. That would be
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
But the fact is, all we do is hold space. I noticed this. This is what you shared. I will always come back. I will always be present. I will always show up. And
Yeah.
that's what a family member should be doing too. I will
Hmm.
always show up.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm wrong, but I want you to know that I'm here and I love you, and highlight their strengths and their resilience. And I am here to support you in
Hmm.
whatever. Like,
Hmm.
that's what it's about, especially during the holidays.
And I'm curious because you mentioned a little bit about safety planning specifically for the holidays. Is that something that both a person that's experiencing abuse and, let's say, like you said, a bystander or a family member, if they are going into a household where they think there might be domestic violence, let's say it's like a cousin or something, could they also do safety planning? Like, could you also, let's say, call the national hotline or our helpline if you're in our county? Could they also get that help of like what they should do and how they should act for more like individualized assistance?
Yeah, and if sometimes people are afraid to talk to that person too. I want to put that in there, that sometimes people don't have the ability to not think that they're overstepping,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
But every county has a domestic violence agency. Every county has a helpline to call and get that information, and to
Hmm.
safety plan around what they're seeing, and just to have that resource available if the person does need it. Everybody has to come to it in their own time, in their own space. And that is not easy for family members to sit by when they think something is wrong and not say anything. That is a very hard spot to be in,
Yeah.
but you can't blow up that survivor spot.
Hmm.
They have put in a safety plan already, that, they really have mastered the fact that they're in that relationship and they're surviving it on a daily basis. And you can't blow up their spot. You have to just
Mm.
offer resources, offer to be there, like I said, and highlight the strengths, highlight the resiliency of it all, of them, and just make the call depending on what you're seeing, right? This is what I'm seeing. Bounce it off of somebody else who's a professional in domestic violence. Say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. Is there something I could be
Yeah.
doing? Is there something I could do differently? That's the way to navigate that, I think. And it's very unique based on what you see, what you hear, and the people, right? We're
Hmm.
talking about humans. If it was like a cookie cutter
Yeah.
answer, a cookie
Yeah.
cutter explanation, or a cookie cutter path,
Right.
that would be easy.
Exactly. And I think that's why, like, calling a helpline or whatever and getting an individualized support is helpful for that situation because you're not going to be able to listen to this and then know exactly what to do in that situation because everything is so unique. And, like, to your point, we have no idea what's really happening or what the person experiencing it has already put into place to keep themselves and maybe their children safe. There's one more question I want to ask about isolation and isolation, particularly around the holidays. And do you think that there's almost this increased loneliness and isolation, particularly if a victim's being controlled during the holidays where maybe they can't see their family, maybe they can't go out with their friends or do these traditions? Is it a really hard, lonely time for people experiencing abuse, or could it be?
I definitely think it is. I mean, we know just by the data that not domestic violence, but that the holidays are difficult for a lot of people.
Yeah.
They're not just domestic violence victims. That's another layer.
Hmm.
But we know that suicides increase during the holidays, loneliness, isolation, all of that, that weight around the holidays is real for just everybody.
Hmm.
Now you add the domestic violence in, and that's another layer of stress
Yeah.
and people pleasing and self blame and isolation. So say you work, right? Say that person works and their office is having a holiday party.
Hmm.
And they're not allowed to go to that holiday party, right? They want to, but they can't because the partner will not allow them. Or if they do go to the holiday party, they're not allowed to talk to their coworkers. They have to stand off to the side. And again, you can go, but I'm controlling the environment. I'm controlling what you do.
Mm.
And that's isolating. You could be in a room full of people isolated away from them because you
Yeah.
can't talk openly, you can't laugh at a joke,
Yeah.
everything. And you know that other person in the room is gauging the room and listening to
Mm.
everything and is going to come back and somehow it's your fault,
Hmm.
things that you had no control over in that room. But it is a very lonely place to be for victims
Yeah.
to trying to navigate it alone in a room full of people, right? Even if it's, you have all your family there, but you know you're going to pay the price because Uncle Bobby said something that you know is going to rub that person wrong. And you're standing in the kitchen because you're isolating yourself away from it because you don't know what to do. Like how do you
Mhm.
control everything that comes out of everybody's mouth
Mm.
in an environment? You can't. But holidays are all year long. It's
Hmm.
just not, we talk about it now because it's the holidays, but birthdays are holidays. 4th of July is a holiday. I mean, every month we have Valentine's Day. That's a holiday. We have holidays all the time. We got, this back to back with November, December, that's a
Hmm.
little stronger and there's a little more pressure, you
Yeah.
know, but we have it all the time. And I'll go back to what I opened with. Domestic violence doesn't take a holiday. It happens every day. And we just have contributing factors that makes it worse and like you said, the perfect storm.
And I like that you talked about this to know, let people know that help is available and they could call, even if they're not ready to leave, even if they're not ready to act. They could call the helpline just to get that support that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise because we never close down.
Right, 24/7, 365 days a year. There's someone there to talk to and figure it out so that you know you're not alone. And even not, you don't have to be physically alone to be alone, right? So they could have a house full of kids and relatives and still be alone and feel alone. If they had an opportunity to just step out because they ran out of something and go to the supermarket and make the call and say, I'm really struggling today. I'm struggling to navigate. He's getting more angry and unpack it with somebody who could maybe add on to their safety plan. Because like I said, they already have one.
Hmm.
And sometimes they just need to expand it during the holidays to be safe and call somebody who works in this field to help them navigate it better.
Thank you, Robin, for having such an eye-opening conversation with me about this topic. As we move into the holiday season, it's important to remember that it isn't a magical time for everyone. It can be incredibly isolating and difficult for people experiencing abuse, which is why we need to talk about it even more. See the show notes or listen to the end credits for links to resources and services. And please know that help is always available, even on the holidays. Thank you for listening to this episode of Unsilenced, Real Conversations about Abuse. This podcast is produced by JBWS, a domestic violence agency serving Morris County, New Jersey. Please let us know what topics you would like covered on this podcast by sending an email to podcast@jbws.org. Please note that this email address is only intended for content relating to the podcast. It is not meant to offer immediate assistance or access to services. If you live or work in Morris County and think you might be in an unhealthy relationship, JBWS is here to help. Please visit our website at jbws.org to learn more about our services, or call our 24-hour helpline to speak to members of our staff at 1-877-782-2873. If you recognize controlling or abusive behaviors in yourself, JBWS can also help change those behaviors. Through our Jersey Center for Nonviolence, JBWS offers programs for men, women, and adolescent males who have used abusive or controlling behaviors in their relationships. Please visit jbws.org/JCNV or call 973-539-7801 to learn more. If you don't live in Morris County, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Domestic violence grows in silence, so thank you so much for listening and helping us break through that silence through these types of conversations. Please follow us on social media and continue to share our content to get as many people talking about domestic abuse as possible.